A serious-looking, middle-aged black man sat in a bright, elegant home office. The room was filled with sunlight streaming through large windows, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor. He wore a navy blue suit, neat and proper, with his hands calmly folded in his lap. His eyes were steady, but his face carried a quiet weight. Behind him stood 3 white adults, 2 women and 1 man, all dressed in black formal clothes. Their faces were stiff, their eyes flicking between each other, but none of them said a word. The office was tastefully arranged. A large oak desk sat in one corner with a tidy stack of papers, and a family photo on the wall showed happier days. Thick curtains framed the windows, and the warm sunlight lit up the room in a golden glow, making the silence feel heavier. The man's name was Michael. For over 20 years, he had been part of this family. He had been the one who drove to school events, fixed broken doors, and stayed up with the sick. He was not their father by blood, but he had been there through everything. He had paid for the house's new roof, the kids' college books, and more grocery bills than he could count. When there was a need, he filled it, never keeping score. Today was the day of the will reading. The woman he had been married to for many years, Lisa, had passed not long ago. It was a quiet and painful goodbye. She had been kind to him, or so he thought. Her final words were gentle, and she had held his hand with care. But now, sitting in this bright room with shadows of silence behind him, Michael wasn't sure what to expect. The man standing behind him was Lisa's brother, Charles. The 2 women were her nieces, Erin and Julie. They stood straight, eyes cold, lips pressed tight. None of them looked at Michael directly, as if he wasn't supposed to be there. Yet he sat, waiting, silent, not demanding anything. He had come with respect, because that's what he always gave, whether or not it was returned. The lawyer had not arrived yet. The room felt still, like a held breath. Michael glanced around, taking in the space he had helped maintain for years. The polished floor, the freshly painted walls, the chair that squeaked unless you leaned just right. He remembered painting those walls himself one summer. Lisa had picked the color. He had paid for the paint. He shouldn't even be here, Charles muttered under his breath. Michael heard it, but didn't move. His expression didn't change. He simply sat, waiting, because that's what people like him often did, waited, hoping decency would rise. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, a bird chirped from a nearby tree. Michael kept his hands folded. His eyes didn't leave the sunlight on the floor. No matter what was read from that will, he knew the truth in his own heart. What he gave, what he built, what he meant. Years before that quiet day in the office, Michael had walked into Lisa's life with nothing but honesty, hard work, and a steady heart. He didn't come from money, but he knew how to build things. Trust, respect, and a stable home. When Lisa introduced him to her young son Josh, Michael didn't try to replace anyone. Instead, he simply showed up, day after day, year after year. Josh was only 6 back then. He was shy, with big eyes and questions he was too nervous to ask. His real father had never been around, and many days, Josh sat by the window, waiting for a visit that never came. Michael noticed, but he didn't say much. He just started doing things, helping with homework, cooking breakfast on weekends, and driving Josh to school when Lisa had to work early. The first time Josh called him Dad came out by accident. They were fixing a toy car in the garage. It slipped out like a habit, and Michael paused for a second. Then he smiled and kept working. From that moment on, he took the role seriously. When Josh needed new shoes for school, Michael bought them. When Josh wanted to join a soccer team, Michael paid the fee and stood on the sidelines at every game, rain or shine. He cheered louder than anyone else, clapping and calling out advice like a real coach. Even when the team lost, he made Josh feel proud just for trying. Money was tight most of the time. Michael worked long hours at an auto repair shop. Sometimes he picked up extra shifts or side jobs fixing people's cars in their driveways. He never complained. He used the money to make sure Josh had everything he needed, and some things he simply wanted. Lisa's family saw what Michael did, but they never said much. At holidays, they would nod politely, maybe say thanks if he brought food or helped clean up. But there was always a wall, like he was close, but never close enough. Still, Michael stayed quiet about it. He wasn't there for praise. He was there for the family. As the years went by, Josh grew. He got taller, stronger, and smarter. Michael helped him with science projects, taught him how to fix a flat tire, and gave advice about choosing good friends. Every school event, Michael was there, always in the crowd, always ready with a proud smile and a strong hand on the shoulder. When Josh graduated high school, he looked out into the crowd and found Michael first. Lisa sat next to him, smiling, but it was Michael's eyes Josh locked onto. They shared a nod, quiet but full of meaning. Michael never asked for anything in return. He never said, "Remember what I did." He just did it, because in his mind, being a parent wasn't about blood. It was about showing up, standing firm, and giving what you could, even when no one clapped for you. And so he gave, year after year, because that's what Michael believed a father should do. As time passed, Michael's life with Lisa and Josh felt like a steady rhythm. Their days moved forward with a familiar pattern: breakfast in the morning, work during the day, and family dinners at night. Weekends were spent on small trips to the park or working on projects around the house. Sometimes they'd have quiet movie nights with popcorn and blankets where they all laughed at the same silly jokes. It was simple, but to Michael, it was everything. He had built a life here, a real life. The world around them seemed to shift, but within the walls of their home, things stayed the same. Michael had put in hours at the auto shop, not only to provide for his family, but because he loved the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Fixing a car wasn't just about turning a wrench. It was about fixing something that would help someone else, just like he helped his family. When Josh turned 16, he got his first job. It was a small gig at a local cafe, but Michael was proud of him. He had worked hard, just like his stepfather had always taught him. Every day after school, Josh would come home, still in his apron, and sit at the kitchen table with a tired but proud smile. Michael would ask about his day, and Josh would talk about his customers, the long hours, and the small tips he had earned. Lisa would listen too, but her mind seemed to be somewhere else. Over the years, she had grown distant, less involved in the everyday happenings of their home. Michael noticed, but he didn't say anything. He didn't question it. It was her way, and he respected that. He focused on his role, on keeping the family together, on making sure Josh had everything he needed to succeed. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Then, as Josh prepared to graduate high school, the tension between Lisa and Michael became harder to ignore. Lisa had become more reserved, spending hours alone in the bedroom or making long phone calls in hushed tones. She never shared much, and Michael didn't push. It wasn't his place to ask, especially when she seemed to be carrying something heavy on her own. One afternoon, when Josh was away at a school event, Michael found a stack of papers on the kitchen counter, papers that weren't there before. They were legal documents, filled with words that made his stomach tighten. It was a will. Lisa's handwriting was neat across the top, but Michael didn't need to read it all to feel the weight of what it meant. He didn't know what had changed. He didn't know why Lisa had chosen this path, but the documents left him with more questions than answers. Still, he didn't say anything. He placed the papers back where he found them, his hand steady, his mind racing. He knew something was coming. Something was about to shift. But for now, all he could do was wait. Wait for the answers, and wait for the inevitable changes that life had a way of throwing his way. Michael didn't fear the unknown, but in that moment, he felt an unfamiliar weight, a sense that the ground beneath him was shifting, and he wasn't sure what would remain when it stopped moving. As the days passed, Michael's mind kept returning to the papers he had found. They weighed on him, heavy with unanswered questions. Lisa had always been a quiet woman, but recently she seemed even more distant, as if there was something she wasn't saying. Her mood had shifted, and Michael couldn't help but feel a quiet unease settling over their home. He couldn't explain it, but he sensed that something was off. And the will, the papers, only added to his growing concern. He tried to focus on his usual routine, fixing cars at the shop, picking up extra shifts when he could. Work was his escape, the place where he could keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was pulling away, retreating into herself. He noticed it in the way she spent more time alone in their room, the way she avoided conversation when they sat down for dinner. The silence between them was growing, and it was becoming harder for Michael to ignore. One evening after dinner, Lisa asked him to come to the living room. Her voice was soft, and her eyes seemed to carry a weight that Michael hadn't seen before. She motioned for him to sit across from her. Michael, sensing that something important was about to be said, sat down slowly, his hands resting on his knees. "Michael," Lisa began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks now, ever since he found the will. But he wasn't ready for what Lisa would say. "I've been keeping something from you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about the will, about what I've decided." Michael's stomach tightened. He had a feeling he knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel all too real. "I didn't want to hurt you," Lisa said, her eyes filling with tears. "But I left everything to Josh. Everything. Not you." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He didn't know how to respond. He had always been there for Lisa and Josh, giving his all to their family. Yet now, it seemed as if all of that had been for nothing. He had never expected anything in return, but hearing that the one thing he had worked so hard for, his place in this family, wasn't even acknowledged, stung more than he could put into words. "Why?" Michael finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa looked down, her hands wringing together. "I don't know, Michael. I thought Josh should have everything. He's my son, and I wanted to make sure he had what he needed. You've been amazing, but I just couldn't do it." Michael sat there, processing the words, feeling as though the foundation of everything he had known was slowly crumbling around him. He had never asked for much, never expected a thank you, but this felt different. It felt like betrayal. "So that's it," Michael said, his voice steadier than he felt. "After everything." Lisa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I never meant for it to be like this." The room was quiet, the weight of her words hanging heavily between them. Michael didn't know what to say. He had always known that life could be unpredictable, but this felt like the end of something much deeper than he had expected. He stood up slowly, his mind racing with thoughts and questions he couldn't answer. He walked out of the room without a word, unsure of what the future held, but knowing one thing for certain: his life, his place in this family, had just changed forever. The days after that conversation were heavy, like the air before a storm. Michael couldn't bring himself to talk much. He kept his distance, both physically and emotionally, from Lisa. He spent most of his time in the garage, working on cars, pretending that the noise of the tools and engines could drown out the confusion in his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the fact that everything had changed. Josh noticed. He could always tell when something was wrong. Michael had been there for him for so many years, guiding him, teaching him. But now Josh found himself on the other side of an awkward silence. Michael hadn't been angry, at least not outwardly, but it was clear that something had shifted. One afternoon, Josh came into the garage. He leaned against the doorway, watching Michael as he tightened a bolt on a car's tire. The sound of the wrench turning echoed in the quiet space, but Josh broke the silence. "Are you okay?" Josh asked, his voice hesitant. Michael stopped what he was doing and set the wrench down. He wiped his hands on a rag, but his mind was still racing. He looked up at Josh, his eyes tired, but his voice was calm. "I'm fine," Michael said, though it didn't feel true. "Just working." Josh stepped into the garage, looking down at his shoes. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "You've been distant lately. I don't get it. Why don't you just tell me what's going on?" Josh asked, his voice carrying a mix of confusion and concern. Michael sighed deeply. He thought about how to answer, but no words seemed right. Finally, he sat on a nearby stool, motioning for Josh to sit across from him. Josh hesitated, then sat down slowly. "It's not about you, Josh," Michael began, his voice steady but quiet. "It's about everything that's been happening. With your mom and the will. I didn't expect it to feel like this." Josh looked down, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. He hadn't expected Michael to talk about it. "I don't know what to say. I didn't want this to happen either." Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. "You don't have to say anything. I don't know what to do now. After everything I've done, to be left out like this, it's hard to understand." Josh felt a knot form in his stomach. He had always known that Michael had sacrificed so much for their family. He had always been there, in the background, supporting, building, fixing. But now, seeing the hurt in Michael's eyes, Josh felt a pang of guilt. He had never thought about the emotional cost that Michael paid, always assuming that things would stay the same. "Michael, I didn't ask for any of this either," Josh said softly. "I never wanted things to change like this. You've always been there for me, and I don't want that to change." Michael looked at him, his eyes softening. "It's not your fault, Josh. It's just a lot to process." There was a long silence between them. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, but inside the garage, there was only the sound of their breathing. Josh finally stood up and walked over to Michael. "You're my dad, no matter what the papers say," Josh said firmly. "That's what matters to me." Michael looked at him, his heart heavy but grateful. For the first time in days, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Michael sat in the living room later that night, staring out the window at the quiet street. The house was still, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Lisa hadn't come downstairs since their conversation, and Josh had gone to bed early. Michael didn't feel tired, though. His mind was wide awake, replaying everything from the last few days. He had thought about leaving, just walking away, finding a small apartment somewhere and starting over. It was a thought that crossed his mind more than once, especially after the conversation with Lisa. But deep down, he knew that leaving wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't change the fact that he had given his all for this family. And yet, when it came time for things to be set in stone, he was left out. He thought about Josh's words earlier. "You're my dad, no matter what the papers say." It was comforting, but it didn't change the facts. It didn't change the will. Michael couldn't ignore the sting of it. The feeling of being pushed aside, like all the years he had put into this family, didn't matter in the end. It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about being seen, being acknowledged. After some time, Michael stood up and walked toward the stairs. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he had to talk to Lisa. Ignoring the situation wasn't going to make it better. The silence between them had grown too heavy to carry any longer. If they were going to move forward, they had to face this together. He knocked softly on the bedroom door before entering. Lisa was sitting at the edge of the bed, staring down at her hands. She looked up when she heard the door open, her eyes red from crying. "Michael," she started, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Michael stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. His anger had simmered down, replaced by a quiet sadness. He walked into the room and sat down on the bed next to her. "You didn't just hurt me, Lisa," Michael said softly. "You made me feel invisible. All those years of working, taking care of things. I thought it mattered." Lisa let out a long, shaky breath. She turned toward him, her eyes filled with regret. "I never meant for you to feel that way. I was just trying to make sure Josh had everything he needed. I don't know why I didn't see what you needed too." "It's not just about money, Lisa," Michael replied. "It's about respect. It's about feeling like I was part of this family. You know, I never asked for anything in return. I did it because I cared." There was a long silence. Lisa reached out and placed her hand on Michael's, her fingers trembling. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I don't want this to be the end." Michael looked at her, his expression softening. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that things couldn't stay the way they were. They had to rebuild, even if it meant starting from a place of pain. He squeezed her hand gently. "We'll figure it out," Michael said, "but it's going to take time. I need you to see me, Lisa, to understand what I've been giving all these years." Lisa nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I promise I'll try." For the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. It wouldn't be easy, and things wouldn't go back to the way they were before. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Over the next few weeks, things began to slowly change in the house. Michael and Lisa started talking again, but their conversations were no longer about the small, everyday things that used to fill their days. Instead, they were about the bigger issues that had been hanging over them for so long. The tension between them hadn't disappeared, but it was beginning to loosen. They were both trying, though it wasn't always easy. Michael spent less time in the garage. He still worked at the auto shop, but when he came home, he made an effort to sit down with Lisa or Josh. They didn't talk about the will much, but Michael could feel that the air between them was different. Lisa was trying to understand, and Josh, now a young adult, was stepping up in his own way. He'd check in on Michael more often, asking how work was going or if he needed help with anything around the house. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, Michael sat down on the porch with a glass of iced tea. It was a warm summer night, and the sounds of crickets filled the air. The sky was darkening, with just a few streaks of orange and purple left from the setting sun. Michael leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze brush over his face. Josh came outside, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He had a thoughtful look on his face as he sat down next to Michael. There was a pause before Josh spoke. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he said, his voice serious. Michael turned his head slightly, surprised by the shift in Josh's tone. "About what?" "About the will. And everything that's been going on with Mom," Josh explained, looking at the ground. "I know I haven't said much, but I didn't want you to feel like you weren't part of this family. I know you've done so much for us." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. Hearing Josh say that meant more than he could express. He had always been there for Josh, doing everything he could to be a positive influence in his life, but hearing that Josh understood was like a weight lifting off his shoulders. "Thank you, Josh," Michael said quietly. "I didn't need anything from you, you know. I've always just wanted to be there for you." Josh nodded, his expression softening. "I know, but I should have said something sooner. I see now what you've done for me, for us. I'm sorry if I took that for granted." Michael smiled, a genuine smile that felt like a release. "It's all right. We're all figuring this out. What matters is that we're talking about it now." Just then, Lisa stepped out onto the porch, holding a tray with some freshly made sandwiches. She set it down on the small table between them and sat down beside Michael. She gave him a hesitant look, as if waiting for something to change between them. Michael looked at her, his expression warm but serious. "We're getting there, Lisa," he said softly. "It's not easy, but we'll keep trying." She smiled faintly, nodding. "I know. I just want to make things right." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun set completely. the sky now deep and full of stars. It was a quiet night, but it felt like the start of something better. They didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in a long while, Michael felt like there was hope for the future. There was still work to do, but they would do it together. Time passed, and the air in the house began to feel lighter, even if the past still lingered in the background. Michael, Lisa, and Josh were learning how to navigate the new dynamics in their family. The silence that once hung between them had gradually faded, replaced with quieter, more thoughtful conversations. They were still finding their way, but the change was undeniable. Michael continued working at the auto shop, just as he always had, but now he found himself looking forward to coming home more. He'd often find Josh sitting at the kitchen table, going over his college applications or talking about his future plans. Lisa was more present too, helping around the house and taking small steps to reconnect with Michael. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. They were rebuilding, one conversation at a time. One Saturday afternoon, Michael and Josh were in the garage, working on an old car that had been sitting for months. It was a project that Michael had put off, not because he didn't want to fix it, but because there had been other things that needed attention first. But today, with the weather warm and the day stretched out ahead of them, they decided to get started. As Michael worked under the hood, Josh handed him the tools, their movements synchronized in a quiet understanding. There was no pressure to speak, no awkwardness, just the sound of wrenches turning and the occasional exchange of words about the task at hand. "You're getting pretty good at this," Michael remarked as Josh tightened a bolt with careful precision. "I've been paying attention," Josh replied with a smile. "I guess I learned a lot from you." Michael nodded, his heart feeling lighter. It wasn't just about the car. It was about everything. About the way they were learning to be a family again. They didn't have to fix everything at once, but they were making progress. And that was enough. Later that evening, after they had finished working, Lisa called them inside for dinner. The smell of freshly cooked food drifted through the house, a comforting reminder of the little things that had always been part of their lives. Michael and Josh sat down at the table, and for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace. As they ate, Lisa looked around the table, her gaze shifting between Michael and Josh. It was still a bit awkward at times, but the connection was there. She took a deep breath, setting her fork down before speaking. "I'm sorry for everything," Lisa said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm trying. I really am." Michael met her gaze, and for the first time, he saw the depth of her regret. It wasn't easy, but there was a warmth in her words that made him believe they could keep moving forward. "I know, Lisa," Michael replied, his voice steady but kind. "We're all trying, and that's what matters." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, talking about Josh's future plans, Michael's work, and even the weather. There was laughter, a few jokes, and a sense of normalcy that had been missing for so long. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the night went on, and they finished their meal, Michael looked around the table at the people he had fought so hard for. They had been through a lot, but they were still here, still a family. In that moment, Michael realized something important. Sometimes, the hardest moments in life led to the most unexpected places, and even though things weren't exactly how he had imagined, they were still his family. And that was enough.